Ma'am, you need to sit down. You're blocking the aisle, and frankly, you're already causing a scene. The flight attendant Claire Donovan barked the words with barely concealed irritation, her voice cutting through the hum of the first-class cabin. Her face, framed by a tight blonde bun, was flushed as she stormed down the aisle toward the black woman standing near seat 4B, I said. Sit down, Claire repeated, her hand shoving Amara Jefferson's shoulder, forcing her back into her seat. The motion was sharp, deliberate, and sent a glass of water tumbling from Claire's tray, splashing across Amara's tailored charcoal suit. Amara, drenched and stunned, sat frozen as the cold water seeped into her clothing, staining the fabric and pooling on the legal briefs in her lap. The first-class cabin, filled with well-dressed passengers, fell silent, but not one person spoke up. No one offered a napkin or a word of support. Instead, their eyes, some curious, some judgmental, pinned Amara as the problem, the outsider who didn't belong in their polished world of privilege. You people need to know your place, Claire hissed loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Her words hung in the air, venomous and unapologetic. What Claire didn't know, what no one on Flight 3924 knew, was who she had just insulted. Amara Jefferson wasn't just a passenger, she was a federal judge with over 2 decades on the bench, a woman whose quiet authority could shift the course of history. And with one phone call made with the calm precision of a verdict, everything was about to change. One call, one command, and an entire airline was brought to its knees. The fallout was seismic. Every flight grounded thousands of passengers, stranded news helicopters, circling above a corporate crisis. All because one woman, one powerful woman, had decided that enough was enough. If you've ever been disrespected, dismissed, or treated as less because of who you are, type justice in the comments and share where you're watching from. This isn't just the story of what happened on Flight 3924. It's the story of when systemic prejudice met its match in federal judge Amara Jefferson, a woman who had spent her life dismantling injustice until the day injustice pushed her too far. Before we unravel the events that led to this historic moment, hit the like button and subscribe to ensure you don't miss the justice that unfolds. This story began on a humid Wednesday morning at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, where a routine flight was about to become anything but ordinary. Judge Amara Jefferson had just concluded a grueling 4-week case in Dallas, a high-profile class-action lawsuit against a major corporation accused of discriminatory hiring practices. At 64, Amara carried the weight of her work with grace. Her silver-streaked hair pulled into a low chignon, her navy blazer and skirt immaculate despite the Texas heat. The case had been a landmark victory, ensuring fair employment opportunities for thousands of minority workers. Exhausted but fulfilled, Amara was ready to return to her home in Washington, D.C. for a rare weekend of rest. In her worn leather briefcase, she carried the final draft of her ruling, a 120-page document that would reshape corporate accountability. Little did she know that her greatest test of justice wouldn't come in a courtroom, but at 35,000 feet. At the gate, Amara stood in the priority boarding line, her posture straight despite the fatigue etched into the faint lines around her eyes. Her presence was understated, but commanding, the result of years navigating courtrooms and boardrooms. As a black woman in a world that often tried to diminish her, she boarded Flight 3924, a direct route to D.C., and settled into seat 4B, an aisle seat she'd chosen for comfort due to a knee injury that flared up during long sits. The first-class cabin was a familiar scene, mostly white, mostly male executives in tailored suits, their status signaled by designer watches and the clack of laptop keys. The air buzzed with self-importance, phone calls about mergers, golf outings, and stock portfolios. Across from Amara in 4A sat a middle-aged white man, Richard Callahan, engrossed in a financial report. He glanced at Amara as she sat, his eyes lingering a moment too long before he shifted slightly toward the window, creating a subtle but deliberate distance. Amara noticed, she always noticed, After 6 decades as a black woman in America, 4 decades in law, and 22 years as a federal judge, she had a finely tuned sense for the microaggressions that others might dismiss as imagination. In the galley, Claire Donovan, a 36-year-old flight attendant with 12 years at the airline, was already in a sour mood. "Can you believe the entitlement in first class today?" she complained to her colleague Javier Ruiz as they prepped for service. "Half these people act like they own the plane, especially the ones who clearly don't belong up here." Javier, a newer hire, nodded uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Neither realized their words would soon ignite a firestorm. As boarding continued, Claire moved through the cabin, offering pre-departure drinks with a practiced smile. "Good morning, Mr. Callahan. Your usual gin and tonic?" she asked warmly, placing a linen napkin on his tray table. "Mrs. Larson, sparkling water with lime, right?" Her interactions were polished, personalized, until she reached Amara. "Water, please," Amara said politely, meeting Claire's eyes. "Room temperature if possible." Claire's smile faltered her gaze, sliding past Amara to the passenger in 5B. "Sir, can I get you anything before takeoff?" she asked, ignoring Amara's request entirely. The man ordered a bourbon, which Claire delivered promptly with a napkin and a smile. Amara's request remained unanswered. It wasn't the first time Amara had been overlooked, but the slight stung nonetheless. She considered repeating her request, but decided to wait, focusing instead on the legal briefs in her lap. The case she'd just ruled on had been a beast: hundreds of depositions, years of data, and a corporate giant that fought tooth and nail to avoid accountability. Her ruling was a triumph, but it had taken a toll. All she wanted now was a smooth flight and a glass of water. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Claire began the safety demonstration, her voice crisp over the intercom. She made eye contact with each passenger as she demonstrated the seatbelt procedure. Each passenger except Amara. When she reached row 4, her gaze skipped over Amara, landing on Callahan with a nod before moving on. It was a small act of exclusion, but to Amara, it was as loud as a shout. The plane taxied to the runway, and Amara felt the familiar weight of being rendered invisible. She'd experienced it in law school, in courtrooms, in boardrooms, moments when her presence was acknowledged only when it served someone else's purpose. But today, the slights were piling up, each one a pebble in a growing pile that threatened to tip. At cruising altitude, Claire began the drink service, her customer service persona in full swing. "Champagne for you, sir," she said to a passenger in 2A, placing a flute on his tray with a flourish. "Mr. Callahan, another gin and tonic." Callahan nodded, and Claire served him promptly, adding a small bowl of warmed nuts. When she reached Amara, the judge repeated her request. "Water, please, room temperature." Claire's smile tightened. "I'll get to you in a moment," she said, moving to the next row without a second glance. 10 minutes later, every passenger in first class had a drink except Amara. As Claire passed by again, Amara raised a hand. "Excuse me, believe you missed my water." Claire's response was curt. "I'm serving priority passengers first. You'll have to wait." The word priority landed like a slap. Its implication clear. Callahan, overhearing, smirked, his expression one of quiet agreement. Amara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, her years of courtroom discipline keeping her composure intact. Finally, after serving refills to everyone else, Claire returned with a half-filled plastic cup of water, no napkin, no nuts, and placed it on Amara's armrest without a word. Around her, passengers sipped from crystal glasses, their trays adorned with linen and snacks. The contrast was stark, intentional, and impossible to ignore. The meal service brought more of the same. Amara had requested a gluten-free meal when booking her ticket, a necessity due to a medical condition. When Claire reached her row, she shrugged. "We're out of special meals," she said, her tone flat. "I specified gluten-free when I booked," Amara said calmly. "Could you please check again?" Claire's voice rose, drawing attention. "Ma'am, I said we're out. You'll have to take what's available. What was available was a stale roll and a wilted lettuce leaf served without utensils or dressing. Meanwhile, other passengers enjoyed hot entrees and full-place settings. Amara tried to focus on her work, but the uneven tray table made it difficult. When she pointed it out to Claire, the flight attendant snapped, "That's not my job, deal with it." The dismissal was loud, and several passengers glanced over their expressions, ranging from annoyance to mild sympathy. Still, no one spoke up, needing to stretch her knee. Amara noticed an empty aisle seat in row 2. She stood to move, but before she could take a step, Claire's voice rang out. All passengers must stay in their assigned seats. It's policy. Amara sat back down only to watch minutes later as Callahan requested to move to the same empty seat and was cheerfully accommodated by Claire. "Of course, sir, let me grab your bag," she said, her tone warm and accommodating. The double standard was no longer subtle, it was blatant. A pattern of discrimination woven into every interaction. Amara's patience, honed over decades of navigating prejudice, was wearing thin. She pressed the call button to request assistance with her frozen in-flight entertainment screen. Once, twice, 3 times over 20 minutes. Each time Claire walked past, ignoring the glowing light. Amara overheard Claire mutter to Callahan as she refilled his drink, "Some people think they're entitled to everything." Callahan chuckled, and the sound was a knife in Amara's chest. The cabin hit turbulence and the seatbelt sign came on. For 15 minutes, everyone stayed seated. When the sign turned off, passengers began moving to the lavatories. Amara stood to retrieve her medication from the overhead bin pills she needed for her blood pressure overdue by nearly an hour. Before she could open the bin, Claire's voice sliced through the cabin. "Sit down now." The command was sharp, infantilizing, and loud enough to silence the cabin. "I need my medication," Amara said, her voice steady. "The seatbelt sign is off. Turbulence could return any second," Claire snapped. "Sit down or I'll report you." Amara pointed out other passengers moving freely. "They're up. I just need my pills." Callahan, who had just returned from the lavatory, chimed in. "Just follow the rules, lady." Other passengers nodded their murmurs, aligning with Claire's authority. The collective dismissal was suffocating. Amara stood again, determined to get her medication. Claire rushed down the aisle, her face red with anger. "I said sit," she shouted, shoving Amara's shoulder hard enough to knock her back into her seat. The water pitcher in Claire's hand tilted, drenching Amara's suit and the legal briefs in her lap. The papers, her ruling on the hiring discrimination case, were now a soggy mess, ink bleeding across the pages. Amara gasped, the cold water soaking through to her skin. Claire didn't apologize. Instead, she turned to the cabin. "I'm sorry for the disruption, folks. Please stay seated." The implication was clear. Amara was the problem, not the victim of assault and property damage. The cabin erupted in complaints. Not about Claire's actions, but about Amara's supposed disruption. Always making a scene. Someone muttered, "Can't they just behave?" Another whispered. Amara sat, water dripping from her clothes, her dignity under siege. "May I go to the lavatory to clean up?" she asked, her voice steady despite the humiliation. Claire blocked the aisle. "Sit, we're in turbulence." The seatbelt sign was still off. Other passengers moved freely, their privilege unquestioned. Amara pulled out her phone and began typing notes, documenting each incident with timestamps. Claire noticed. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Taking notes," Amara replied. "No recordings allowed?" Claire snapped, snatching the phone from Amara's hand. "This is a security issue. That's my property," Amara said, her tone sharpening. "You have no right to take it." "I'll hold it until we land," Claire said, pocketing the phone. The lead flight attendant, Marcus Tate, approached, siding with Claire without hesitation. "Ma'am, we have protocols," he said condescendingly, "for everyone's safety." The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're addressing an uncooperative passenger. Please remain seated while our crew handles this uncooperative." The label branded Amara, flipping reality on its head. She was the victim, yet painted as the villain. Something shifted in Amara Jefferson's mind. This wasn't about water meals or even the assault. It was about a system that allowed such treatment to flourish. Unchecked. a system that assumed guilt based on skin color, a system that demanded correction. Amara reached for her briefcase, her expression hardening into resolve. Claire Callahan. The silent passengers, none of them knew who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. If you were Amara, what would you do next? Share in the comments and subscribe to see how this story unfolds. Amara sat still for 15 seconds, her mind racing. She thought of her mother, a school teacher who faced segregation daily, yet taught her to stand tall. She thought of the plaintiffs in her recent caseworkers who fought for fairness against impossible odds. She thought of every person who had ever swallowed their pride to avoid conflict. Then, with the calm of a judge delivering a verdict, Amara opened her briefcase. Claire's eyes narrowed. "Put that away or I'll take it too," she threatened. The threat was the final straw. Amara stood, water still dripping from her suit. Her presence suddenly commanding the cabin, she pulled out a leather wallet containing her federal judiciary credentials. The gold seal of the U.S. courts gleamed as she held it up. "I am Federal Judge Amara Jefferson of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia," she announced, her voice clear and unshakable. "You have discriminated against me based on my race, assaulted a federal judge, confiscated my property, and damaged court documents critical to a landmark case." She gestured to the soaked papers in her briefcase. Evidence of justice for thousands now ruined. The cabin fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Claire's face went pale, her confidence crumbling. She looked to Marcus for support, but he stepped back, his eyes wide with panic. Amara reached into her briefcase and pulled out a secure government phone reserved for judicial emergencies. "This is Judge Jefferson," she said into the device. "Connect me to Director Elaine Harper." The name sent a jolt through the cabin. Elaine Harper was the head of the National Aviation Council, a figure with unparalleled authority in the industry. Claire whispered to Marcus, "Who's Elaine Harper?" Marcus's voice was barely audible. "She oversees every major airline. She can shut us down." Passengers who had smirked or ignored Amara's mistreatment now sat rigid, their complicity exposed. Callahan stared at his tray table, his earlier bravado gone. "Elaine," Amara said into the phone, her tone shifting to one of mutual respect. "I'm on flight 3924, and I've been subjected to racial discrimination, assault, and property damage. This is a systemic failure." The conversation was brief but decisive. Yes, physical contact was made. No one intervened. "The documents are ruined, I agree. Immediate action is needed. I'll stay on board until they arrive." Amara turned to Claire. "You have 2 minutes to return my phone and provide your employee information. This plane will land at the nearest airport where airline executives and FAA officials will be waiting." Claire's hands trembled as she handed back the phone, unable to meet Amara's gaze. "This is a mistake," she stammered. "If I'd known who you were." Amara raised a hand, silencing her. "That's the issue, Ms. Donovan. Respect shouldn't depend on a title. Dignity is owed to everyone." Her words weren't just for Claire, but for the entire cabin, an indictment of a culture that required credentials to confer humanity. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "We're diverting to Nashville International Airport. Flight attendants prepare for landing." Confusion rippled through the cabin. Passengers checked their phones, unaware they were witnessing a reckoning. As the plane descended, Amara sat tall, her wetsuit a badge of resilience. The passengers who had dismissed her now avoided her gaze. Their silence no longer indifference, but shame. Through the windows, Nashville's runway came into view, lined with black SUVs, government vehicles, and media vans. This wasn't a routine landing, it was a crisis unfolding in real time. When the cabin door opened, a man stepped aboard. Victor Langston, CEO of the airline. His face, usually seen on CNBC, was grim as he scanned the cabin, locking eyes with Amara. Behind him were 2 executives and an FAA official, their expressions tense. Judge Jefferson Langston said, his voice carrying through the cabin. "I apologize profoundly for what you've endured. This is unacceptable." Before Amara could respond, her secure phone rang. She answered, activating the video feed. Elaine Harper's face appeared, her presence commanding even through the screen. Judge Jefferson Harper said, "I've grounded this airline's entire fleet until this is resolved. Every flight is canceled." The cabin gasped. Claire, standing near the galley, protested, "You can't ground an airline. There are thousands of passengers." Langston turned to her. "She just did. The National Aviation Council has the authority to act when systemic issues threaten passenger safety or dignity." The reality hit like a wave. Passengers who had grumbled about delays now realized they were part of history. Those who had enabled Claire's behavior through silence or comments shifted uncomfortably, their complicity laid bare. Amara stood, her voice steady. "This isn't about me. It's about the right of every person to be treated with respect, regardless of who they are." Her words silenced the cabin, their truth undeniable. Langston faced Claire. "Ms. Donovan, your employment is terminated. Surrender your badge to security." Claire's face crumpled, her career evaporating in seconds. "I didn't know," she whispered, tears falling. "You shouldn't need to know," Langston said, echoing Amara. "Dignity isn't optional." Marcus and the other crew members approached Amara, offering apologies. "I should have stepped in," Marcus said, his voice thick with regret. Amara nodded but offered no comfort. This was a moment for accountability, not absolution. The passenger's demeanor had shifted. Callahan, who had told Amara to follow the rules, now stared at his shoes. A woman who had smirked earlier fidgeted with her purse, unable to look up. Langston addressed the cabin. "We're launching a full investigation into our culture and training. This failure is on us and we'll fix it." He turned to Amara. "Judge Jefferson, we'd value your guidance on our reforms." Amara's response was firm. "Discrimination is systemic. It's not one person. It's a culture that allows it to thrive. It's passengers who stay silent. It's leadership that fails to set standards. Change must be comprehensive." Her words resonated, a call to action that would echo beyond the cabin. Security escorted Claire off the plane. As she passed Amara, she stopped, tears streaming. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Amara met her gaze. "Intent doesn't erase harm, Ms. Donovan. Accountability is the first step to change." Her tone was not cruel, but resolute. The voice of a judge who knew justice required truth. Harper spoke from the video call. "Judge Jefferson, a car is waiting to take you to D.C. Mr. Langston will spend today explaining this to his board." As passengers gathered their belongings, the earlier complaints about delays were gone. They had witnessed a turning point, a moment when one woman's stand forced an industry to reckon with its failures. Langston asked Amara, "What made you make that call? After enduring so much, what was the final straw?" Amara paused. The assault was a line crossed, but the silence of this cabin, people who saw wrong and said nothing, that's what told me this was bigger than me. I called for my mother, who faced worse on buses and trains, for the workers in my case who fought for fairness, for everyone who's been silenced by injustice. As Amara walked off Flight 3924, she left behind a transformed cabin and the seeds of industry-wide change. The media swarm outside captured her exit, her dignity unshaken despite her soaked suit. 6 weeks later, Amara stood beside Elaine Harper at a press conference in D.C., unveiling the Passenger Dignity Accord, a mandatory training program for all airline employees. The initiative, developed with input from civil rights leaders, passengers, and even Claire Donovan, who had begun confronting her biases, aimed to ensure respect for all travelers. Claire, in a public statement, said, "I was blind to my own prejudice. Losing my job was painful, but facing my actions was harder. I'm committed to learning and advocating for change." Her transformation became a case study in accountability. At a judicial conference, Amara addressed her peers. "Justice isn't just in courtrooms, it's in how we treat the stranger beside us. My mother taught me to demand dignity, Even when it's denied on Flight 3924, I honored her legacy. Behind her, a photo of her mother, a teacher in the 1950s, stood proud despite segregation. Then images of diverse flight crews, pilots, attendants, executives showed progress. Today they're seen. Amara said justice requires action, not silence. 3 months later, Amara boarded a flight for a vacation. The crew greeted her with respect, not because they knew her title, but because it was now Standard A placard. In every seat pocket read, "Every passenger deserves dignity. Report discrimination immediately." Amara settled into her seat, a glass of water on her tray, and smiled. Sometimes justice begins when one person says enough.